Well, we did a tour. We did this one tour when the record came out. We were playing up somewhere. It was Willie and Don Bowman and me and Pootie were all playing poker in some hotel room. And all of a sudden, there's this guy sitting on one of the bed there, just kind of sitting there. And all of a sudden, nobody really knew him or whatever. We couldn't figure out. So we played poker. So finally, that guy gets up and leave. And so I think Bowman says, "Anybody know who that was?" And somebody said, "Well, no, not really." He said, "Well, he's probably either a country disc jockey or a narc." And Willie goes, "Well, I hope he's a narc." I'd prefer that. Yeah, I remember that. But yeah, so we played poker with Willie a long time ago.
Well, we were opening for Willie for a few dates, like 4 dates in a row down in Florida and Georgia, I think. I got so impressed with Willie's guitar playing that I hadn't realized quite how courageous and strong he is. But each night, it's like we'd be done playing and we'd be in the back room, like eating whatever food they had out or something. And there'd be like some really bad speaker blasting the music from the stage right here in my head. And they would have Willie loudest in the mix because, he's Willie. And so I'd be sitting there, like eating and just hearing this thing. And at some point, I'm realizing I'm listening to just him really. And what a courageous guy he is. Like he'll go far out on a limb. And it's just like, he'll just figure out a way to get out of it, And so he's like fearless guitar player and very creative and very strong, kind of undervalued as a guitar player. But anyway, that's about his playing. But as far as meeting him, Willie seems to be a really down-to-earth person, and but also real smart. Like he understands what's going on right around him. So when he walks into a room, he seems to just know that everybody's going to want to meet him. And so he gets it out he comes over to you. He doesn't wait. You don't have to go kiss the ring and everything. No, before you have a chance to do that, he'll come over to you and your friends and hang out with you for a minute, a couple minutes. And he doesn't do it in a big glad-handing way. "Hi, I'm Willie Nelson." He just kind of walks over there with his kind of, maybe with his thumbs on his pockets and kind of just like hangs out with you like he's just one of you, So I remember him doing that, like when we were before the show, and he got off his bus and he came into the room, and there were 30 people, whatever, in the room. But at one point, he just walked straight over to me and whoever I was talking to, and he just hung with us for a couple minutes, So there was that. But then the driver, his bus driver, maybe had a crush on my wife or whatever. But he kept trying to like introduce her to Willie and so forth, and like kind of be the conduit to you get to meet Willie, And I think he got us on the bus at one point, and we felt out of place, like we shouldn't be on Willie's bus. And he was like, "Yeah, he'll be here in a minute," and all this. And then, so I feel like that maybe happened a couple of times over the 4 days or whatever. But at one point, I'm on the bus with Willie and my wife and his wife, and I think there were only about 4 of us, maybe 5 people. And the driver had asked me if I had pot or if I needed pot, and I said, "I'm about out." And so we're sitting there with Willie, and he goes, "How are you fixed for marijuana?" That's what he says to me, and he's in front of this big bunch of pot on a table, and I go, "Well, tell you the truth, I'm down to my last couple of buds," and he sticks a bunch of pot, and by the way, I guess we're smoking by this time, like he's passing around some kind of vape pen or something, and we're smoking pot, with Willie on his bus, and he puts some in a bag, probably like a 1/4 ounce or something like that, and he just hands it to me, and I felt like I should pay him for it, but then I didn't want to for 2 reasons. One, that would make it an illegal transaction, and number 2, I sort of think he's really well off. I think, And so between those 2 things, I just thanked him. I didn't feel like he wanted me to give him money for it. But frickin' Willie gave me a bag of pot, and I got stoned with him, for about an hour or something, Yeah, I remember getting really high. Yeah, he had good stuff. Yeah, and but he was super low key the whole time. Like he's just not a real show off or anything. He's just like real quiet and just like real normal. And right during that time when we were opening for him is when his bass player died. His name was B something or other, and he'd been with him for a long time. And somewhere right in there, his bass player died. And so he got a new bass player. And I think we were like on the guy I think we were opening for them, perhaps on this guy's first gig. And so he came in and he kind of nailed everything, you know. I think he probably studied it pretty hard. But the next day, I heard somehow that they were going to rehearse on stage. You know, it's like we were just killing a bunch of hours, and I heard that those guys were going to rehearse for a while because of the new bass player. And so I was like, man, I'm going down there. And I stood on the side, and I was right behind Bobby, and I watched them for like 2 hours while they just ran through like everything. They were just trying to make sure that the bass player was ready for everything. And
Willie was playing with them?
Yes. It felt like I was watching Louis Armstrong rehearse or something like that. You know, it was like, wow, this is a heavy cat, and I'm getting to just see him rehearse. You know, like, this isn't a show, you know. But I do remember sitting with Paul English, who was he had had a stroke by that point and was only playing a little bit. They had another drummer, I think, and then Paul would play a little bit, if I'm remembering correctly. But Paul too was like just kind and gentle and quiet and just like real nice and real friendly, and he didn't make me feel at all awkward. Oh, what I was going to say, or speaking of awkward, what I was going to add to that was being in Willie's presence was very intimidating, because no matter how low key he is, and thank God he is, or you'd really be freaked out to hang out with him. But when you hang out with him, it's so weird, because you're like, what do you say to a guy that probably knows every president, you know, for the last, I don't know how many years? He's probably met the king of every country. He knows every Hollywood star. He knows every athlete. He knows everybody, no matter what level of fame they're at. And it was just hard to know what you should say, you know, other than to be yourself. And kind of not, you know, you don't have to say anything. You know, if I was hanging out with you, I wouldn't have to say anything, or I would. You know, that's
why we get along.
Yeah.
Well, the first time I met Willie, it was about 1974. BMI back then had their award shows at different hotels. Like it was at the Sheridan Inn out on Harding Place and I-65 at that time. Jerry Reed and Mac Davis was like the two hot artists at that time. So I'm standing there watching. When Jerry'd walk through, there'd be like 50 people behind him, you know. And then Mac would walk through and there'd be 50 behind him, and I'm watching that, you know. And somebody's standing beside me, I turn around looking, it's Willie Nelson. And I was a big Willie fan. I bought his first 45 single. I was in like the 11th grade. Turn out the lights, the party's over. And that's the first time I met him. And nobody was even hanging around him, man. I mean, he was a very successful writer, but he hadn't really had a lot of recording success, you know. The second time I met him would have been with Hank Corcoran, I reckon. But I got to know him, and he's done 2 of my songs. Well, yeah, you know the old actor Rip Torn? Yeah. Okay. I get hold of Willie, I want to play him a song, and he said, I'm in Santa Monica, and I said, I can be there on a plane, Willie. And he said, well, we're at a condo and look for the bus, Willie's bus, Honeysuckle Rose. And he said, so we had a time set, and I get out there and I see the bus, and I seen a guy walk on right before I did, and it was, and so it's just me and Willie and Rip Torn, and Willie passes the joint around like twice, and Rip just falls over, and Willie kind of laughs that he's a drinker, you know. And I was on the bus about an hour. When I left, Rip was still on there. I did meet him. Willie introduced us, but he was still out when I left, man. Man, he was either rolling or smoking one, usually when I was around him, you know, which I always liked to smoke too, you know. But old Hank Corcoran, he was not a smoker, you know, but Willie damn sure was. Well, usually those guys would buy like a pound when they run on to what they liked, you know. And old Hoyt Axton, you know, he had a record company called Jeremiah Records, and he signed me and Dennis Weaver to that label, the actor. And it was after I left Hoyt, he was living in Montana, and he had a maid turn him in. He got busted with a pound of pot, and I wrote the governor of Montana over that deal. You know, if you had the money, you'd buy the good stuff when it was around, you know.
What should people know about Willie?
Man, he was nice to me, and he's so great. You know, like I say, I became a fan of his. I remember when I went out and bought that single. My older brother, who turned out to be a preacher, he said to me, he said, "I can't believe you like that son of a bitch. He can't sing." And I said, well, and I'd read a thing about Willie where he wrote songs, and I said, well, he's a great songwriter, and he wrote, you know, but by golly, he finally had, when he hit big, didn't he?
That's an understatement.
Yeah, I mean, really, it is an understatement. One time I went on his bus, I think it was in Fort Worth, because I was in a rent-a-car, and he wanted to play me a song. Him and Lou had just cut a song. It was on an album somewhere because I finally found it, but it was so beautiful. I said, damn, well, I'd love to have a copy of that. And he took the cassette out, the only one he had, and gave it to me. And I rushed to the airport to catch a plane out of there and left it in the rent-a-car. But it was Highway 40, the jobs are gone, something like that. Something about his Blackbird. Beautiful song. It never got a lot of attention, but Willie gave me that copy like that, you know. Just a really one of us, you know, type guy.
Okay, so I arrive in Austin. I start hitting these clubs and all that. And that same fall of 1973, McMorris Ford downtown wants to show off the new 74 cars. So the come on is country band and free hot dogs and Cokes. And it's in the body shop area, is been cleared out. And on a flatbed trailer is Willie Nelson and band. Country band, kind of generic. And Mr. McMorris is good friends with Willie. He's already given him Fords. You know, he's getting free Fords because he's moved back to Austin. And, you know, you get cars. And here's this band. So this is my real exposure. Here's Willie Nelson in Austin. It's free. Hot dogs are okay. And they're playing. And they look pretty much like hippies. They don't look like a country band. You know, they're all kind of growing their hair out and having a good time or whatever. And, you know, they go through a set and it's pretty normal set. I mean, they're playing songs, going one after another. And then they get into Take Me Back to Tulsa, which I knew, you know, I was getting hip to Sleep at the Wheel and discovering Bob Wills, Take Me Back to Tulsa. And they're playing, you know, cool, Willie Nelson playing a Bob Wills song. But kind of in the middle of it, they take off. And they go on a jam. And it's like, you know, what is going on here? And it turns out to be like a 10-minute song where they're just like free forming it. And I have had the benefit, this is 1973, 2 years earlier, I get to see the Allman Brothers with Dwayne Allman and Dickie Betts. And this is like 2 weeks before Dwayne dies. I've seen them at the State Fair Music Hall. I've seen them. And I've also had the benefit that like 1970, 71, I see the Grateful Dead for the first time. And what I'm seeing here at the McMorris Ford is kind of in that same territory. This is a country band. This is not like a, you know, these are rock and rollers or the psychedelic hippies. It's a country band, but they're doing the same thing. And, you know, pretty soon you go to see a Willie show. It's a Willie show starts at 8:00. It's going to go on as long as Willie wants to. And so basically Willie's shows become these 4-hour or 5-hour marathons. You never know where it's going to go or how it's going to be. And to me, when, during that Paces and Stages period and right before the 1974 picnic, they're still on Atlantic Nashville. They haven't been dropped yet. And Wexler basically pays for 2 nights of recording at what is called the Texas Opry House, which will later become Willie Nelson's Austin Opry House. And those recordings still exist today. And those are the ones that I refer to if you want to get the sense of, Willie Nelson as jam band, because they were doing, they were a freight train. And it was like, this was as good as the Allman Brothers, or I didn't look at it as this is less than the Allman Brothers or the Grateful Dead. No, these guys they're a jam band, a bunch of country music guys. They're a jam band. And that's Willie, and that's his players, and that's the symbiosis they've got between each other. They're talking to each other. They know how to play these things, and they've now been given permission. You go out, there are no boundaries. They learned inside this very structured box. And I think, Paul English, Jody Payne, B. Spears, all his players learned inside this very well-defined box, which is the National Recording System, assembly line almost. And then Wexler takes them to New York, go do whatever you want to do. So I'm seeing the result of that 2 years matured when they're playing at the Opry House and doing that. And their live version of Take Me Back to Tulsa with Johnny Gimbel on fiddle. Mr. Go-To Fiddle in National Recording Sessions, he's part of this deal too, and he's having a great time. And the fact that Willie's here is one reason why Johnny ends up moving back to Texas full time. And as Johnny always liked to tell me, and I always like repeating, he says, "You know what WSM stands for?" "What, Johnny?" "The wrong side of the Mississippi." So it's that, it's going from structure to back to the land of fiddles and steel and dancing, but it's a different crowd that they don't dance 2 steps anymore and they react differently, but it's the same deal. It was always that, when I'd see pictures or watch TV of the Ryman performances at the Ryman Auditorium, the crowd really gets into it. They clap in time. And that ain't how we do. Music is physical here, even country music, and even like introspective country music. The singer-songwriters in Austin all got bands. Jerry Jeff got a band. Everybody got a band because you had to push it and rock it and make it at least danceable, even if people weren't dancing. And that's Willie basically opened those doors and those possibilities. No one was doing it from his end, from the country end. There were people doing it kind of from the rock and roll end, and certainly from the folk music end. But he brought the authenticity of country music to it. You can always use Willie picnics as kind of the guide when people were doing, God knows what they were doing. But, as far as, tripping and making it psychedelic, I think by the early 70s, we were already there was a little of that going on, but it was mainly, it was cannabis and beer. And those were the new drugs. And look, I'm sure there's other drugs involved, but at the picnics, go out in the hot sun and hottest time of the year and sit out without shade for all day, much less Brian called Station 3 days. The Robert Earl Keen album cover for Picnic was not staged. That was his car on fire at the second Willie Nelson picnic, and it was burning. And it was like, it got greasy really quick. And this is the other thing that got so big. In the film that I directed on Doug, you hear Doug kind of complain. He said, those big entourages like the Dead or Willie, that's not my bag. because he wasn't of that level, of course. And it might have been his bag if he had gotten that level. But that's where it became, it was almost clusterfuck. And Willie was at the center. He was kind of the smiling, almost, beatific gnome in the middle of this madness that he created. And he knew he'd created it. And he knew it was chaotic. And he embraced it. So where Brian, that second picnic was not, I thought it was kind of disastrous. And I remember we bailed early because it was 3 days. We did not stay till Sunday. And it was just greasy. But the next year at Liberty Hill was run really efficiently. And it was like the ideal picnic. And that was 75 when the press was flown in to see Willie Nelson in his element. Willie played, the Pointer Sisters for all kinds of variety on the lineup. 75,000 people. I don't think anyone got killed at that one. The next year, people did die. So it was like this kind of sweet spot. And that 75 picnic, the third picnic, is when I think the rest of the world discovered Willie Nelson, along with his album, Red-Headed Stranger. That picnic really put him on the map. But again, it was organized chaos. It rains, and so the tent above the stage sags. Well, how do you deal with that? Well, Paul English pulls out one of his pistols and shoots a hole in it and starts draining it. And Paul is carrying around all the money in his pockets. This is old school country music finances with, meets the rock and roll world of the pop festival. And they get away with it, to degrees. The next year turns bad in Gonzales where people get killed and hurt, and it's just dark. And Willie actually, he sits in with people. George Jones performs, but Willie never does a set. It gets cut short, and then it gets put away, and it doesn't reinvent itself till I think 80 when Willie puts it at his golf course out at his new compound in Spicewood, and Leon's there, and it's the Leon and Willie show. So the picnics have become kind of a tradition unto themselves. What it is today is not what it once was. And those first three picnics were like, first four picnics, those were legendary. 73, 74, 75, and 76, each for different reasons. But by 76, Willie is a one-name superstar. When the first picnic, you knew about him in Austin, but you didn't know about him anywhere else.
Them stories are more suited for the Willie Nelson meetings, Willie's the first. I don't get high, but when Willie passes you a joint, you just gotta, So first time that happened, I was driving over parking lot blocks and everything else. Oh, that's what that does. Good Lord. I've got to meet Willie and Johnny Cash, two totally different vibrations, and I mean that in the sense of the word of if there are such things as auras.
The saddest part of Bobby's life was that she lost custody of her three sons because she was playing. Her husband was Bud Fletcher, and she was playing in his band, playing honky tonks. And the Fletcher family was very well to do in Hill County, Texas, up by Hillsboro. And the Nelsons were just, musicians, white trash type things. They were looked down upon. And so since Bobby was playing honky tonks, the family, Bud Fletcher's family, got custody of the kids while she was doing that. And Willie was the guitar player. And Willie and Bobby's father, biological father, was another guitar player in the band. So Bobby had to quit playing with Willie to get her kids back. Meanwhile, Willie goes to Nashville and has all these hits. It was Crazy and that sort of thing. And RCA would not let Willie use his own band. But Bobby still played music at full time. She played lounges. She did Gershwin, that kind of stuff. She played the American Songbook, but she played 6 nights a week. She told me that when Willie called, she was ready. She was not rusty because she'd been playing all this time. So at age 42, she takes her very first airplane flight to New York City to play on the Shotgun Willie record because Willie had signed with Atlantic, And Jerry Wexler said, use your own band. You have complete creative freedom. And so Bobby goes up there, and Willie goes, well, first, before we do Shotgun Willie, let's do some of our old gospel songs. And they did the Troublemaker in one day. Or actually, she was going to do the Troublemaker. That's what she went to New York for. And so Willie goes, why don't you stick around, you know? And so she played on Shotgun Willie, and then she was in the band. That was it. From then on, you know, from age 42 until she passed away at 91, I believe. She passed away in March. And to me, that was the most amazing story, is that this brother and sister, she was 6, he was 4, when their grandparents showed them the chords to The Great Speckled Bird. And he played his part, she played her part. They looked at each other like, wow, we have a song. Age 6, age 4, 1937. And they played music together ever since, except for the break when Bobby was not allowed to record with Willie. He had his own thing. To me, that's when, I mean, the band had already been called The Family, but when Bobby joined, they really were the family. And that's the spirit you got. It was so cool for a brother and sister, you know, to be together that long. They never had a crossword, ever. I always wanted to do an interview with Bobby Nelson. And I knew her son, Freddie Fletcher. And I was going, Freddie, you got to get me in to see her, you know, interview your mom. You know, she doesn't like to do that. She doesn't like any attention. She wants all the attention to go to Willie. But in 2007, she put out her first solo record, Audio Biography, and just kind of retraced her piano lounge career. And so she finally did interviews. So they were playing Farm Aid in Randall's Island in New York City. And that was when I was going to do the interview. And so I get on the bus. This is, you know, probably about noon. Willie doesn't go on till, you know, he's on all day, but the set's not till like 8 o'clock, so they had tons of time to kill. I go on the bus, and there's Neil Young smoking a joint with Willie in the booth. I'm going, this is going to be cool, you know. But Bobby goes, hold on, you know. And then David Anderson, who is like, if Willie is the West Wing, the Martin Sheen character, David Anderson is Charlie. He does everything for Willie. He's Willie's body man, and he's also Bobby. So he comes out, goes, come on, we're going to go. She goes, there's so much smoke there. I need a break. And so I'm a little disappointed. So we walked to this kind of a weird army. I think maybe Randall's Island used to be an army base or something. It was kind of like an army office type thing. And we sit down, and the music's bleeding from the side. You can hear all the bands and everything like that. And she is so together. I mean, she's just so nice. She's so sweet. There's never any negativity at all. This is when newspapers are starting to realize that they were starting to get into multimedia. So every story had to have a little clip. They want you to take a little camera and make a 30-second clip. So my plan was to have Bobby. She told me that when she plays with Willie on the bus, she has a keyboard that she pulls out from her bunk and plays with Willie. And I go, that would be great for my little. Let me take a think of that. She goes, well, I don't know what the situation is at the bus right now, but come to tomorrow night. We're playing a benefit at the Hard Rock Cafe in New York. If you're still in town, I go, yeah. Well, here's my cell phone. Give me a call. Come by the bus at whatever 7 o'clock, and we'll get you back there. And I go, okay. And so I have a friend in New York. My ex-girlfriend is in New York City, and she's like the only one I knew really that well. And I had an extra ticket to the show, and it was a big deal. So she's with me, and we go, and there's a long line to get on the bus. There's like 40 people. And there's like David Blaine. There's like Stephen Colbert, before he was really famous, when he was still doing the right-wing thing. I mean, there's all these people waiting to get on the bus. But I call Bobby, and all of a sudden this biker-looking dude comes, you know, with an animal name, either bear or gator or mongoose or something like that. He opens the door, goes, Michael Corcoran. Oh, yeah, okay, come on. And so me and my friend, she comes with me, and they didn't say, oh, only you, you know, only one, blah, blah, blah. She comes on the bus, too. And there's Willie again, smoking joint, this time with Woody Harrelson. And my friend is there, and they give her a beer. She bonds with, I think, Amy Nelson, Willie's daughter. You know, hey, how's it going? They're smoking a joint. She's having a great time. I go back there, and Bobby's gone. She goes, okay. And so I'm filming it, and she goes, why don't you sit there? That's where Willie sits. And so she showed me the steps where every night after the gig for hours, they play gospel songs in the bus. Willie sits here, Bobby sits here. Unbelievable. So I film it. It's great. And so I get up and I go, and my friend's there, and she's drinking a beer. I says, hey, finish up. We're going. And she's like, what? I said, come on, finish up. So she finishes the beer, and she goes, did she tell us we had to leave? And I said, listen, we could have been on the bus for 2 hours, and Bobby Nelson wouldn't have said a thing. But my job's done. There's people waiting to get on. Let's go, man. I'm sorry, but we got to go. And I'm like notorious for overstaying backstages. If I'm backstage and there's free beer, I'm not leaving, generally. But Bobby Nelson inspires you to do the right thing. You could use her. Probably people have used her, but it wasn't gonna be me. Not that night. She was so gracious. It turned out there was more fun that we left. It just turned out that way, that we got picked up in a car from people that we knew, and we ended up partying all night, and we had our own driver and that sort of thing. But anyway, that Bobby Nelson thing really, I think she makes people better, around him. She used to go to Antone's by herself. She liked blues, and she'd go to Antone's and sit by herself, and she was just so pleasant and always had time for people. She wasn't a public person, but she was never going to sit in a roped-off area. She was just going to be out there. People would get up, they see Bobby Nelson, they'd get up from their seat, hey, have a seat. And she'd just say, oh, no, I've been sitting all day, And she's like 85 years old, standing up. But she was just so cool. And the thing that's worth mentioning about I was a music critic for The Statesman for 18 years, I believe, and Dallas Morning News for 3 years before that. And I've had to deal a lot with the Willie Nelson circle, Nelson family, whatever. And they're just the most honest. They don't lie. None of them. They don't lie. It's like you can tell. I'll give you an example. It's like when Willie had to cancel a bunch of dates once, and the Statesman was all, oh my God, Willie's dying. They're always worried about Willie dying and us not having a story up. You need to write the obit. I said, I'm not writing an obit while he's still alive. Well, call Pootie, because I told him I had Pootie's number, which is a big mistake. I never should have done that. Call Pootie. So I called Pootie, and I said, hey, Willie, why did you cancel the dates? He goes, well, Willie's just a workaholic. I tell him, you got to rest. We go on tour for 3 months. We get back, he flies to Nashville to make a record with Wynton Marsalis. He's just a workaholic, And he's like telling me all this stuff really honestly. And I'm like thinking God, you wouldn't get that from anywhere else. Anywhere else would spin it somehow. Oh no, he's got to work on this thing like that. But he had carpal tunnel syndrome was the thing. And so, and it was like that with everybody, Billy Joe Shaver, same thing. No lies. You guys will tell you the truth flat out. And I think the thing is that Willie wouldn't get you wouldn't get in trouble with Willie if you told the truth. You might get in trouble with him if you told a lie. And I think that's the thing, because they lived to serve Willie. There was never any doubt that Willie was number one concern, and they all were incredible at their jobs. His crew's amazing.
The first time I met Willie was late 1973, like a couple months after I moved to Austin. I weaseled an interview with Willie Nelson at Coke FM. And I did it for Zoo World magazine, which was a third-tier music magazine. Rolling Stone, Cream, Crawdaddy, Phonograph Record Magazine, Zoo World. But I remember going up to the Coke FM offices, which was on the second floor of this funky little office building on North Lamar, and watching. I mean, I was kind of out in the hallway, but there was a room with a glass window, and I could see Willie being interviewed by Chet Flippo. And I knew who Chet Flippo was. That was kind of he was my guiding star. Here was a guy that was in Austin and writing about Austin, and I'm reading about it up in Minneapolis. And that's a motivator to want to come home. And there's Chet Flippo himself, and he's interviewing Willie. So I'm kind of watching, and Willie's in his It's kind of his jogging phase, I guess. He's got a T-shirt on, cut off shorts. He's got a headband. His hair is beginning to get long, and he's got a little diamond stud in his earlobe. So this was kind of like this melding, this person I'm looking at, kind of hippie, but kind of, country Nashville kind of guy. And I'm sure I asked some really stupid questions then. I didn't know much better. I knew who Willie was growing up in Fort Worth, that every Saturday night, the independent TV station, Channel 11 KTVT, would show all these country music shows and then top it off late in the evening with wrestling from the Northside Coliseum and then roller derby. And I was a big viewer, but early on, this cavalcade of country music shows started with the Cowtown Jamboree, which was basically a little live music show hyping whatever the show was that night at Panther Hall in Fort Worth, which was a great country music venue. And Willie Nelson was always on there, hyping this Cowtown Jamboree. And it's like, you kind of recognize the face and all that. But that was the extent of my knowledge of Willie Nelson until I'm in Minneapolis at the Electric Fetus, and I'm turned on to Yesterday's Wine. And man, I started playing the shit out of that, and that was it was a deep album. I mean, forget this Texas connection, but it was also one of these motivators to want to go home. Here was a deep thinking, this guy's straight up country, but he's talking about mortality and what are you doing here on Earth? I mean, it's deep shit. And I kind of, tapped into the fact that this is where Rolling Stone was acknowledging, Chet Flippo was writing about Willie. So, this was legitimizing this country music guy in a way that when I sat down with him, he was a big deal in Austin. He was becoming a big deal. But you got to understand, 1973, Austin, I mean, there was a scene bubbling up, but it was pretty much Jerry Jeff Walker, Michael Murphy, Willis Allen Ramsey. These were old folkies that started wearing cowboy hats. But in this mix, B.W. Stevenson, he had the hit records at the time. He was actually having hit records. But into this mix were these two outliers, Doug Somm, who'd moved to Austin after getting beat up in San Antonio after he'd come back from California. He saw Austin as a free space where he wouldn't get beat up anywhere. He could be a long-haired cowboy. And Willie Nelson had wound up in Austin. Willie's house burned down in Nashville right before Christmas. And he's kind of like without a place to stay. And his booking agent in Texas said, I know this dude ranch in Bandera. It's, bankrupt right now. It's empty. You guys, you can go stay there. And, at the time, Willie was living in Ridgetop outside of Nashville. And it was Willie Nelson and many others. He had basically kind of a commune almost going. A lot of his band members lived out on this, rural piece of property. His mother and her husband lived on one side. His mother and father, they were divorced, but they both lived there with their spouses. So the mailbox said Willie Nelson and many others. So when the house burns down, what's going to happen with the many others? Well, a lot of them, his band basically came with him to Bandera, which is the cowboy capital of Texas. It's full of dude ranches. And they all hung out, spent the winter at this defunct dude ranch playing golf, which was an activity Willie had taken, but also B. Spears, the bass player who had joined Willie's band, was coming up from San Antonio where he'd grown up, and he was bringing LSD. So they were taking acid and doing things like playing golf backwards, starting at the hole and going to the tee, and supporting themselves by playing every Saturday night at Flora's General Store in Helotes outside of San Antonio. They had a Winnebago. That's how they got around, a big old Winnebago. They led up to Winnebago one day to come visit Bobby, Willie's sister, who lived in Austin. She had followed Willie to Fort Worth when they were young people in the 50s. And she had briefly lived in Nashville amongst the many others, but she had moved to Austin, and she was working the piano bar circuit. Very popular. Coach Darrell Royal of the UT Longhorns was a fan of Bobby's and would go to Mike and Charlie's piano bar and sit there and listen to her, befriended her. And Willie knew Austin because in the 60s, when he was a country music Nashville recording artist, writing songs was not enough. He wanted to be that performer. Baron Young, Ray Price offered him a lot of money. Just stay at home and write songs for him. No, I want to be you. That was basically Willie. So his period in Nashville from 1960 through 1972 or so was all about, he's writing songs and being successful, but it was about him trying to bust through as a performer. To augment that, he played live. And the one place that he could play live consistently throughout the 1960s was Texas. So they would make that killer drive from Nashville, play Fort Worth almost every weekend, it seemed like, at Panther Hall. But he'd come down to Austin, and Coach Royal had met him when he played package shows. He toured with people like Charlie Pride and, a country music guy. But when he came back to Austin to basically after his house burned down, he came back to visit Bobby. And they were going to pay her a visit this one trip, but they picked up a hippie chick in their RV in their Winnebago. And she was, "Where are you going?" "Well, I'm going to Austin." And she asked to be let out at this place, the Armadillo World Headquarters. And they did. They dropped her off. And Willie he had his eyes open. And it wasn't long afterwards that he and Paul English approached the Armadillo. "I want to play here." At the time, Willie was going to live in a condo in Houston with his wife Connie. Connie told me that it was one of these. Willie came down here and playing the Armadillo in 1972 was kind of this breakthrough. The hippies and the rednecks lied down together and found a common bond in beer, weed, and Willie. Everybody loved country music, and that became kind of a new thing with hippies. It's like embrace country music. And especially Willie was kind of this old guy. He's 40 years old. In country music years, you're supposed to be selling insurance or just retiring to the country club by then. Instead, he reinvented his whole career. And among the hipsters and the hippies, you had these folkies doing country. That's okay. But, if you really want to kind of get deep in the weeds, go with this old, neoclassical country. This guy with Nelson was a guy to follow. This is concurrent with Jerry Wexler first went to San Antonio looking for Doug Sahm. Jerry Wexler was given a label. The Ertegun brothers gave him a custom label, Atlantic Nashville. Why don't you do that? And Jerry had done all this rhythm and blues stuff for Atlantic. He wanted to get off on a different trip, so Atlantic Nashville. Jerry Wexler is going to sign acts. And the first two acts he signs are Doug Sahm and Willie Nelson. And people in Nashville are going, what the fuck? Who is this Doug Sham? And Willie Nelson, didn't he just cycle out from Chet Atkins? After how many years? This is a new act? So Wexler is going way off the farm to chase what he believes in. And he believes in Doug Sahm because here's the guy that can play all kinds of music authentically. And he loves that. And okay, I'm going to make you a star, and does a kind of a super session with Bob Dylan and Dr. John and Fathead Newman up at the Atlantic Studios in New York, which turns out to be a flop. It doesn't really sell much. At the same time, Willie goes to New York. And in the course of I think it's 5 days, recorded 2 albums, a record at Atlantic Studios. No one's done that. And he's been such an animal, a product of the Nashville assembly line recording system. He knows how to cut quick and efficiently. And, in Atlantic Studios in New York, where everybody's indulging one another. This is kind of a new thing, but he records Shotgun Willie, his debut album on Atlantic Records for Atlantic Nashville, and he records a gospel album, The Troublemaker, which comes out later. Well, Shotgun Willie similarly is not a big hit anywhere, but it is kind of outside the box. It shows Willie is given the keys to the car, and here are the possibilities. So, with Wexler's help, you hear horns. There's horns on the record. There's no horns coming out of Nashville, except maybe Marty Robbins horns. But no one's doing horns like that. And it's funky. And the title cut. Shotgun Willie sits around in his underwear, biting on a bullet and pulling out all his hair, trying to write a song. He's writing a song about, and it's written on a Tampax wrapper in the Holiday Inn in New York, where he's trying to write a song for his album. And it's kind of, totally self-referential. And it's a pretty great record. And he does, that's where he does a new version of Me and Paul. It's all over the place. But that too is not a hit, except in Austin and kind of throughout in the satellite cities of Texas, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio. It becomes a thing. And part of it is Coke FM is this radio station that plays progressive country music, whatever that is. So you can hear the Rolling Stones, Ernest Tubb, right next to each other, and all these local acts that are beginning to boom up. You can hear B.W. Stevenson, Willis Allen, wall to wall around the clock. And then here comes Shotgun Willie. So it gets played a lot. And, in Austin, all of a sudden, by the second album that he does for Atlantic Nashville, Phases and Stages, Willie's kind of like he's on a level with all these guys. And really by then in 74, because he's had Phases and Stages, and by the second Willie Nelson picnic, the first picnic's in 73, and that gets a lot of attention. Waylon and Willie and Billy Joe Shaver and Doug Somm and some of these rock and roll acts and Leon Russell. This is kind of this blending that's coming together. So by the second picnic, Willie is bigger than all these people. By 1974, Willie has eclipsed everyone. And oddly enough, back in Nashville, they still don't know what's going on in Austin. And certainly the Erdogan brothers don't. So it's like, they cut the cord. Atlantic Nashville is folded, just as Willie's got his duet with Tracy Nelson, After the Fire Is Gone, is starting to chart, and Phases and Stages is getting some attention, but the plug's pulled. So no one knows about that album. Is kind of forgotten. And to me, that is the best Willie Nelson album out there. That is his first great concept record. Yesterday's Wine kind of articulated that in a country aspect, but he goes full bore in Phases and Stages, and it sets the stage for Red-Headed Stranger, which definitely announces to the rest of the world outside of Texas who this guy is and who he becomes. So getting to interview him that first time, he was very tolerant, and I'm just sure he liked the attention, that, and especially these hippie kids coming around asking questions. It was a whole new deal for him. So he was very open and kind. And, it started a relationship where I could go to the well, I could get interviews with Willie and I started hanging out and, being part of what this phenomenon was really up until, with Red-Headed Stranger and the way he blew up. I kind of, at that point, I wasn't doing the hang as much as I had been because it got too big. 200 people backstage. And the interesting thing is backstage was, you'd see these Texas politicians, you'd see celebrities, you'd see a lot of dope dealers. You would see all walks of life and they all wanted to be around Willie. And it was just an incredible phenomenon to watch blow up. and I've been lucky enough to kind of like go back to the well every year or two ever since. I mean, I had a history. So in 2006, when I got it in my mind to do a book, because Willie's going to be 75 in 2008, and that's a great way to honor him. I just took it upon myself to write a book. And I didn't ask permission at first. I just started working on it. I got a contract with Little Brown. And I was like, I was a year into research when I finally sat down with him. And it was at the Saxon Pub. His daughter Paula was going to do an afternoon concert on a Sunday afternoon, somewhere around the Christmas holidays. And I go into the club and it's empty, but he's in the back corner booth. Of course, corner booth with looking out, so he sees everyone coming in. There he is. So I sit down and say, "Hey, Willie, I've been doing a lot of obsessing about you." And he kind of gives me a smile. I said, "I know. People call me, have been asking, about talking to you." And, then it's kind of like a little pause and the heart starts very well. And he said, "I'm sure glad you're doing this." And so that was it. And it wasn't like, I'm not going to him for fact checking or anything like that. I said, "So you're going to talk to me?" He said, "Sure." Which in Willie speak is like, yeah. Come see me. Come to the bus and tell him I said to come. Good luck. And so I was still working another year almost on this. And it was, and just doing my business. I didn't know when I was going to talk to him or what was going to happen. And I had to also think, I might not sit down with him. This may not happen. Willie's big. He's hard to get a hold of. In 2007 in May, I think it was, or April, so maybe it was February, somewhere in the spring of 2007, the band spent a week playing the Fillmore, and they'd been doing this for a couple or 3 years, the Fillmore in San Francisco, and doing a residency and packing it out. And that was a perfect time. I contacted my friend Sylvie Simmons. "Sylvie, can I stay at your place?" A fellow music critic, and she let me stay in her place in Lower Haight. I was staying there, and I would go every day to the show. I mean, every night to the show, but also every day I would go out to. I think they were out somewhere near Tiburon the band was staying at a hotel, and I would go talk to everyone that I hadn't talked to, like I hadn't talked to Jody Payne. At that time, Jody Payne was spending most of his time at the bar, so I spent time at the bar in an early afternoon to get what I needed. Tunin Tom, the keeper of Trigger, I hadn't talked to, and he was elusive. He was like one of these guys. He didn't like talking to people, but the rest of the crew was like, "Come on, Tom." So I got with him, and I'd hang out. I'd hang out with Mickey Raphael, who is Pootie Locke later explained, Pootie being Willie's road manager. Mickey's the reader in the band. So that's how I knew that when I wrote this book and put it out, Mickey gave it the okay, so everybody was okay. So all this is happening all during the week. And on the last night, it's raining. And I contacted David Anderson. "Can I come on the bus? Just thank Willie." "Yeah." But I'm sitting out in the rain. It's before the show. And Gates Moore sees me, one of the drivers, bus drivers. He said, "Come on in. Just come on." And Willie was talking with the daughter of Mark Rothbaum at his table, and I waited no, it's Mark Rothbaum's sister. When the sister leaves, Willie, "Hey, come on up." And first thing he says is, "Well, when are we going to talk?" I said, "Whenever you want." He said, "How about after the show tonight?" And I said, "Okay." So what that meant is once he said that, and that was great, I got the permission. Show hadn't started. I had to run back, running like a mile and a half back to Sylvie's apartment, grab all my shit, and take my rent car, which was parked at Sylvie's, back to the San Francisco airport, drop it off, get a cab, go back to the Fillmore. And I'm out of breath when I get there, and the show is just ending. And I'm like, so I've got my stuff with me. And I'm going to go, usually I'm hanging with Mickey at the end of the show. He was fun to hang with, and we were buddies. I thought, no, I better go on the bus first. And the show had not quite ended, so I got my stuff and got on the bus. And then all of a sudden, here comes Bobby onto the bus, and she tosses a a spray of red roses that someone's given her to me. And Willie comes on, and all of a sudden he's signing 2 or 3 posters for the Fillmore. And I swear to God, within 5 minutes, the bus is rolling. Now, back in the old days, before Willie had carpal tunnel and he was younger, he would stay at a gig till every last band got what they wanted, whether it was a picture or an autograph. That's Willie, and that's one reason he's Willie, and he is the person who we know he is. He would always do that, but with carpal tunnel, and he was hitting, he's 73 at this time, he was getting limited of what he could do and what he couldn't do. So that was the new thing, is I just sign a few posters and get out of there. And like when I was interviewing the band, Willie never showed up. The bus was parked somewhere where no one knew it was. So bus is rolling, and I'm watching, and Lana, his daughter, his eldest daughter, she cooks Bobby and Willie breakfast as the bus is rolling. And it's organic eggs with grapeseed, hash browns. I'm trying to remember what else they had. It was a really good breakfast. And they have breakfast as the bus is rolling. And after breakfast is done, Bobby retreats, goes back to her bunk, and Willie and I start to talk. And I've got my recorder. And, I'm trying to remember all the stuff that I wanted to ask him and all that. I didn't know this was going to be the time. We started a little after, probably about 11 o'clock, because they had to eat first. And the bus was rolling by 10, it seemed like. But we went till about 3 in the morning. And at that point, he'd smoked me under the table. I'm a smoker. And, again, if you're, I'm a smoker of cannabis. And if you're going to smoke, or if you're going to do anything with cannabis, that's the mountaintop. Willie is the gold standard. And so I'm keeping up with him all right. And we're going, but at 3 in the morning, it's like, I forgot what I just asked him. I forgot what we were talking about. And usually I had a question lined up in the back, and I didn't. And I got to go to bed. I can't go anymore. And David Anderson said, well, we're in Santa Rosa, California. Here's your hotel key. Willie's got the day off tomorrow. So, you can go for round number 2. And Gates came and fetched me about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And Willie and I went for about 3 more hours. And I'd had the advantage of going over my computer with my manuscript and basically figuring out what I hadn't asked him and what I needed to ask him. And it was funny because, during this time, we're sitting on the bus, and it's a day off. So, Willie gets calls. He gets calls from his wife, Annie. He gets calls from Ray Price. And, he'll stop and take those. And he'd done his morning exercise. So he had a bicycle in the hatch on the bus. I said, so you rode the bike around? He said, yeah. I said, was it good? And he said, yeah. And I said, don't you ever get lost? And he laughed. And he said, all the time. And I said, well, what do you do? And he said, well, I just go knock on a door. And I say, I'm Willie Nelson. Can you tell me where I am? and he always finds his way back. But he gave me pretty much everything I asked for. There were a few questions that it's like, I didn't want the thing to end, and I didn't go there. And there were some sensitive subjects. His son, Billy, had kind of a tragic life and ended tragically at a reasonably young age. And whenever you talk to Willie about Billy, the eyes start tearing up immediately. And it's just like, how far are you going to go with this? And, but it was great. And he rolled up one more reef. And again, I don't know, they smoked me. I was hiring a Georgia Pine. But he gave me a couple reefers afterwards and rolled me joints. He said, here, take these with you on the road. And I might have smoked one that night. But the next morning, I had to drive to San Jose to the airport from Santa Rosa, where I'd never been before. Liked it so much, I went back 6 months later. But I got my rent car, and damned if I'm going to, let this go. So I lit up in the car, and shortly afterwards, went over the Richmond East Bay Bridge around Richmond. And it was the weirdest experience because all of a sudden it just started, I get tunnel vision and I started sweating. And I've never had this on a bridge before, but it was like that. I had to kind of keep my eyes peeled to drive, and I thought I was freaking out. And I told Willie's ex-wife, Connie, about that after the fact. I said, yeah, I had kind of a meltdown on the bridge because for smoking that Willie weed. And she said, he would love to know that. You know, you should tell him. Because he always had the best. And it was, you'd see that in San Francisco. You know, there were dealers that would come on board, or people had been growers had been saving stuff for Willie. And at that time, California had some medical marijuana clinics, but that was it. Pootie Locke basically was led on a tour of clinics. They let him in with an entourage because Pootie was Pootie and Willie is Willie. The interesting thing is, back in those Atlantic Nashville days, in Austin in the early 70s, Doug Somm was the educated cannabis consumer because he had been turned on by J.R. Chatwell from the Modern Mountaineers and the Tune Wranglers, who went in the 1930s. The Modern Mountaineers did a song called Mary Jane. I mean, he was these were hip cats from way back when. You know, he wouldn't even have to drive down to Mexico, but you could drive to Mexico and just bring stuff back. No one knew. And JR kind of turned Doug onto weed. So when Doug winds up in San Francisco in the late 60s, he's already an old soul. He knows about varieties and varietals. And in this film that I did on Doug's song, Jan Winter of Rolling Stone talks about that you know, Doug knew. He was like, he had a very mature attitude. So Doug kind of, I think, opened the door to Willie. Willie, when he had been experimenting, he'd tripped and he'd gotten into weed in Nashville, but that was all under the table. You couldn't talk about that stuff. And in Austin, he began to embrace it. And his ex-wife, Connie, said, and Lana both said, Willie was a really shitty drunk. Paul English said the same. You know, Willie get drunk, I'd have to take the keys from him. But marijuana tamped down the anger and just the bad habits that alcohol seemed to bring on. And so he turned into a kind of sometimes drinker, not much of a drinker at all. And he became a full-time pot smoker. And today, to me, he is that symbol. As when he parked his bus, this was about 5 years ago, he did a residency at the Radio City Music Hall in New York. The bus is parked outside, and every day it would be Snoop Dogg knocking on his door, not Willie knocking on Snoop Dogg's door. And that's basically, as far as the ranking goes, that's all you need to know.
But I wanted to talk about Willie Nelson and his troubles with the IRS. This week was the anniversary of Willie having just a whole lot of stuff seized by the IRS. And I thought, man, I'm going to see what was being reported about it at the time. It was in 1990 and 32 years ago. So as I started looking up old newspaper archives, the first thing I noticed was just the random pictures of day-to-day life stuff. And I was thinking, how in the hell could 1990 look like it was so long ago? I realized it was 32 years. That's kind of incomprehensible to those of us who remember 1990 rather well. But I just couldn't believe how old those photos look. We've all been through that every now and then. But I was reading articles, and there was a lot of just random, you know, hey, Willie's off key with the IRS, just a bunch of corny headlines that didn't go too deep. But I found one particular article that I liked, and it was inspired by Willie's problems, and it was written by someone named Retta Grimsley Johnson. I'd never heard of that person. Maybe you guys know Retta Grimsley Johnson. I believe this is a woman, and she really, really writes well, or wrote well. And this was in Longview, Texas newspaper. But I wanted to read you a little bit of that. It says, Willie Nelson, IRS trouble proves what a great American he is. Sometimes late at night, inspired by loud wine or too much song, I give what the few who know me well call the Willie Nelson speech. She had me already. In late night speeches, if late night speeches have subtitles, it might also be known as the quintessential American speech, or the oh no, she's gearing up to talk about Willie again speech. It runs even longer than a Sports Illustrated commercial, thus there are a few ungrateful detractors. My thesis, Willie Nelson is more American than Mom, Apple Pie, or Honda Civics. That's funny. Chevrolet got left out. He is the best all-time example of America's unique talents and enterprise, its failures and its successes. Consider, he started out a simple songwriter contributing crazy to Patsy Cline's brief but brilliant career. That alone should have assured him a place in the annals of American music. But to become a true American icon, he first had to face adversity, in this, the land of heartbreak, in Horatio Alger. Somewhere it is written, no fame or fortune without suffering. Obliging fate saw to it that he lumbered about in relative obscurity, his hair short and greasy, his chosen genre drowned out by emerging rock and roll. Heaven-sent adversity provided him with lyric fodder, and the nights on the road with genuine honky-tonk, honky blues. He cut his teeth on broken beer bottles. Willie finally had enough of adversity. He skipped a few weeks at the barbershop, punched a hole in his ear, replaced his drugstore cowboy duds with jeans and a bandana. Then he made what became known as the crossover. With his new look and old sound, Willie single-handedly made country music acceptable to people my age, who had grown up covering their ears when they heard so much as one nasal note or steel guitar. Man, there's two sentences right there that hold a hell of a lot of weight. How many people have said, I hate country music, but I like Willie Nelson? You know, how many people say, I hate country music, but I like Johnny Cash? I hate country music, but I like Hank Williams. You know, Willie occupied that space big time. But talk about overcoming prejudice. Sometimes in a longer version of the Willie speech, I admit Dolly Parton helped a little. She helped a lot. Soon hippies and preppies and all in between were singing along with Willie, not even realizing some of the new country hits were decades old. But Willie wasn't satisfied. Great Americans seldom are. He wanted his old fans back, too. The fuddy-duddies who refused to board the Rock and Roll Express. He cut the Stardust album right at the height of his newfound popularity with young listeners. He hummed a little Hoagie Carmichael and recaptured the allegiance of the older generation, and without losing a single hip fan. I like that she mentioned Hoagie Carmichael. That Stardust album is really, really great, and Hoagie Carmichael is buried about 50 miles south of me, down in Bloomington, Indiana, and one of the great, all-time great songwriters. Indiana just happens to have quite a few great songwriters. Hoagie Carmichael and Cole Porter are two of them. But anyway, so what was left for Willie to do? He had conquered all ages, become the ultimate American, not overnight, but then overnight success is more British than American. He had fulfilled the requirements for becoming a true hero. He had struck early, suffered long, persisted, reemerged, diversified, and succeeded. Next, he did the only thing left to do. Willie sang duets with every American carrying a tune in a bucket, not to mention some foreigners. His was a democratic act. And he found a cause, because great Americans always think about someone other than themselves. Damn straight. He sang for the bankrupt farmers, raising money and morale. Now, keeping current, his status as the quintessential American, Willie is in trouble with the IRS. When a friend suggested that negated my entire thesis about Willie, I pshawed. P-S-H-A-W-E-D, Pshawed. Never seen that spelled before. Who besides yuppie number crunchers can understand the tax laws of this country? A simple country boy, a creative type like Willie, would be at the mercy of his accountants, as I choose to believe he was. The IRS has seized a lot of Willie's property, maybe even his golf course, which further helps Willie to epitomize an American struggling against his own success. I'd have to become convinced he knowingly cheated on his taxes to change my tune or speech about the ultimate American, in which case I'd brush off the one about Chris Christopherson, Evolution of a Genius. It says Retta Grimsley Johnson writes commentaries 3 times a week for Scripps Howard News Service. Scripps Howard News Service. I'd never heard of Retta, but I enjoy that. I didn't see this published elsewhere. I'm guessing this is a syndicated column that appeared elsewhere, but I just saw it in Longview, Texas newspaper. And I don't know what I think about country singers owning golf courses and such. I like the idea of people who have brought us great entertainment and great joy being rewarded for that. And, you know, it's an interesting thing about Willie, where he's everything that we think Willie is, the weed smoker, you know, staying out all night, playing the bars and all that. He's also the jogger, you know, the guy that plays golf. He's an interesting person. Never met Willie. Hope to one day, but never met him. And I'm glad he got out of his tax troubles. I think I remember reading that a lot of people bought his things at auction and gave them back to him. And that would be, I don't know, I like the spirit of that. I really do like the spirit of that. And I like, somebody contacted me a year or so ago, and they said that they represent the person who was Willie's lawyer during all of his tax problems, and they asked if I would interview him. And I said, hell yeah, but he lived in Texas, and I don't, and it's a long way off, and I don't, you know, I do everything in person. I haven't been to Texas, but hopefully next time I go there, I can look him up, and it would be interesting to hear that story from Willie's lawyer's perspective. It'd probably be a perspective that's not out there, and it'd be a fun one, but, you know, stay tuned for that.
When Dylan and Willie first met, and it may have been that Rolling Thunder review, and, you know, Willie was kind of became an ancillary part of it briefly. I think he was invited in. He sat in Houston and in Austin, but at this time, you know, Dylan is Dylan. Willie is still kind of this ascendant character. It's very important to talk about Dylan. It's when Jim Franklin was painting Leon Russell's swimming pool in Tulsa, and the Grateful Dead are going to play Austin. Leon tells Jim, you know, I've never seen the Grateful Dead. I'd like to go see him. And Jim says, well, come down with me. I'll introduce you to all these people. So Jim was the poster artist for the Armadillo World headquarters. He kind of left to go paint Leon's pool. So Jim brought down Leon just in time for him to join a jam session on Thanksgiving Day at the Armadillo, the night after the Dead play, the Municipal Coliseum. A spontaneous jam is organized, and Leon agrees to come. Doug Somm leads the jam. Jerry Garcia and Phil Lesh stay over from the Armadillo. They have a big Thanksgiving feast. It's free. It's organized. And, you know, people are told about this free concert on the radio, packed house. And there's Mary Egan from Greasy Wheels, who's the fiddler. And she's sitting in with Willie a lot already. Willie's not part of this jam. But on this same trip, the next day, Leon and Doug ride down to Flores to go watch Willie play at Flores. And Willie meets Leon Jim Franklin introduces him, and this is incredibly important. Leon's probably the biggest rock act going at this moment. He's moved back to Tulsa, set up this empire, and he's fixing to work on Hank Wilson's back. Leon wants to go retro, and he meets this guy Willie Nelson, and it's like Leon wants to be Willie. Willie sees this guy coming from Tulsa, where he's got studios and this complex and all that, and Willie's kind of decided to plant seeds in Austin. So, Willie wants to be Leon. And this dynamic goes on through the night, up until, they record albums together. In the early 80s, they tour together. And then, they go their separate ways. But this alliance is kind of like where Willie sees the possibilities of being someone more than just a recording artist, being something bigger, and this is a kind of a movement, a cultural leader. So he's building that kind of reputation. And so when Rolling Thunder comes through, when they start up, I wrote about it for Rolling Stone when the night of the hurricane benefit. Rolling Thunder had already done their little run through the Northeast, and I think that's in the Scorsese film. But when they kind of went full on, it's the night of the hurricane. Bob Dylan has heard about Ribbon Hurricane Carter and prison boxer, so he wants to free him. So they're going to do this big benefit in New Orleans. But it's so haphazard, and the people organizing don't know what the fuck they're doing. It moves to the Astrodome in Houston. And the New Orleans promoters, the main promoter is a guy named Louis Messina, who today remains big shit legend in Live Nation. He was the son of a boxing promoter from New Orleans at the time, and he didn't know what he was doing. So Bill Graham had to come in and basically produce the show in 2 days, which he did. Got to watch that up close. And, Willie comes into Dylan's orbit, his attention, because they play this show in Houston. And you start, at that time, Willie is he's big in Texas, and he's beginning to be bigger elsewhere. But as Connie Nelson pointed out, up until Red-Headed Stranger, Willie couldn't play past the state line. He could draw big crowds in Houston, Dallas, Fort Worth, and San Antonio, but Louisiana, Oklahoma, people didn't know him, but they were beginning to get known. So Dylan was, I think the key period was when, after they played the Astrodome and they were going to do a tour, they encamped for about a week at the Driscoll Hotel in Austin. And famously, this is when Bob Dylan goes to Lucy in Disguise costume shop and buys, outfits the entourage in all these funky costumes. And that's when I get to sell him 2 records at OK Records. He pops in this record store where I'm minding, it's kind of a retro record store, and I'm minding the counter while the owner's off. I don't know where he went. And Dylan walks in alone. And I'm trying to chase him. I'm stringing for Rolling Stone. And, I've tried to interview him. I've gone to the night of the hurricane. I'm tracking things. Probably the first instinct would be to ask him, hey, man, I've been trying to interview you. I'm working with Rolling Stone. But no. I'm kind of like, oh, here's Bob Dylan. And let's watch. So I'll get to watch him go through and see what kind of records he's pulling out until a kid shows up, a space cadet. This kid sees him and his eyes grow big. Oh, man, I've got this, kind of a cause that you can help do. And, I'm watching a scene this is Bob Dylan's life. Oh, man, he reaches in his pocket to fish out, and he gives me money to pay for the very best of Eric Clapton and Weasels Rip My Flesh by Frank Zappa. And I was trying to play Buddy Holly records and stuff while he was there and seeing if I could kind of spur anything. No, he just bought these 2 records, and they weren't very imaginative, but he was rushed out of the store. So this guy. So he's hanging out in Austin enough to understand at this time, this is Willie Nelson's town. I think there was a friendship, a bond kind of formed there. It was from a distance, but I don't think it really got tight until they were doing the ballpark tour. And that was Dylan's initiative. he can play with anyone or anyone. And Willie's he's an easygoing opportunist. And, I'm sure he felt pretty good about that, but they became friends. It was never writing songs or anything, but they're two kind of, we say Dylan and we say Willie, two one-name superstars. And there was a bond of sorts and a mutual respect. I remember Connie telling me that when they were touring, just once Dylan, shouted out to her and pulled her. She was walking along with someone else with a concert promoter, and Dylan, hey, comes out of the bus. Hey, Connie, come on and hang. And she came away saying she kind of felt sorry for him, or felt like this guy led a very cloistered existence, and he just wanted to hang and make cheap, small conversation. And he really liked her, and she could tell that. And so she hung out with him, and she liked him, but he was off in his own world. The fact that they played together, great. I don't think there was ever going to be any kind of great collaborative effort, just because by that period when they started doing the ballpark tours, I think they were both mature artists of their own right, and they, not to say that they still weren't creating, but I don't think Willie was looking for that, and I don't think Dylan was looking for that. Oh yeah, let's see if we can put something together. That wasn't happening, but that's the fact that they toured together like they did. That's the great mutual respect, and they both knew who each other was and what they did. And I think Dylan probably looked at it. This guy, carved his own path and did it his own way, and did it, so backwards in a way that, by the time Dylan was 40, he was kind of, off into like his third or fourth phase. When Willie hit 40, that was his first real reinvention.
I wanted to talk today about Pootie Locke. Pootie was Willie Nelson's stage manager for almost 35 years. Pootie passed away, I think it was in 2009. He's one of the most famous road crew type people of all time. He's on a very short list of road crew royalty. So Pootie's job, he took care of everything on stage, where all the equipment went. And in the early days, he would haul the equipment and set it up. And if you were some photographer that thought you were good enough to step up on stage and take pictures of Willie, or if you're a crazed drunk fan who just wanted to get close to him, you better have Pootie's permission or you're in a world of hurt. Pootie was going to bring the hammer down on you and make sure that you knew that, you couldn't just jump on stage and start taking pictures of Willie or something. And he took his job very seriously and was very, very good at it. But the one time that I got to meet Pootie was Willie Nelson was coming to Indianapolis to play. And this was back in the mid-'90s. And he was playing a place called the Vogue. It's the same place that I saw Johnny Cash, and I talked about in an earlier video. And it was an expensive ticket because it was a way smaller place than what Willie would typically play. So the ticket was probably $90 or $100, and I just didn't have that kind of money. But I had to go. I was thinking, what can I do? So I knew the people that did the local road crew stuff. What would happen is somebody like Willie is touring. They will hire people in each city who will unload the truck, all the gear, and then bring it in and help set it up. Just people who know what they're doing. There's people, road crew type people, but they don't know how it goes for this show. So I got on the local road crew. They hired probably 6 of us, and I knew about Pootie. I knew that there was this legendary, colorful character that took care of things for Willie. And he's the first person that I saw when me and the guys on the local crew were just standing there. He comes in and he says something to the effect of, "Well, ladies, you better warm up your shoulders because it's time to work." And yes, sir. We went out and we unloaded a semi full of gear, brought it into the Vogue. And, you know, local guys, we want to work hard for Willie Nelson, and we want to make sure we do this well. We're making about 100 hours probably to load in and load out, but we don't know what to do. So somebody has to tell us. And it was amazing how good Pootie was at telling us what to do. And he's talking to probably 6 different people at once and say, you grab that and go over here and do this with it. You do this. And he wasn't a jerk about it at all. He was actually really nice, but at no time was I just standing around wondering what to do. And it was really nice to see people who were really good at what they're doing, and that's what Pootie was. And at one point, you know, he realizes I'm the nerd that has to, I keep asking him questions while I'm working, just trying to get to know Pootie, and he realizes I'm that guy that wants to know some things. And he says, you, come here. And he says, okay, you got a big responsibility here. I need you to do this, and don't mess this up for me. Can you do that? And I'm like, yes, sir. What do you need? And we pull Willie's amplifiers out of a road case. So I get to grab his old Baldwin amps. I think his 1964 Baldwins is what Willie plays, if I remember right. And I picked one of them up, carried it right up onto the stage, and set it down where it was supposed to be. And Pootie's like, put it right there. Okay, right there. Grabbed the other one, set it down right next to it. If I remember right, there were 2 of them that he tours with. And that was pretty awesome, getting to carry Willie Nelson's amp onto the stage. I felt pretty good about that, we'll say. So after that, this other case comes in, and he tells everyone, all of us on the crew, to go to the other side of the room. So all of us walk onto the other side, and they pull Trigger out of the case. And Willie's guitar, the one we've always seen him with. And I volunteer, say, would you like me to carry that up onto the stage for you, Pootie? And he's like, no, don't even look at it. You guys just stay over there. And he picks up the guitar, carries it up onto the stage, and sets it down next to the amp. And we had everything set up in no time. And he's like, all right, just go hang out and have a good time. I think his motto was, there are no bad days. And we did not have a bad day on that day. Stayed for the show. It was amazing. It was great. I got to watch it from really close up. And, you know, Willie's everything you'd hope Willie to be. And Pootie was everything you'd hope Pootie to be. And when it was over, we tore everything down before the audience had even left the place. You know, they were filing out, and we had everything torn down, and Pootie had us put everything back up onto the truck, and it was great. He walked around shaking hands, and he did a good job, you know, and just that was about that. But he made a big impression with me. I really love being around people who are, you know, really good at what they do, and he was definitely that. So when he passed away, that's what my memory was a fun night in Indianapolis with Pootie. I figured I'd tell some Willie Nelson stories for you guys today. I'm going to focus on his early years when he first got to Nashville and was trying to get himself established as a songwriter, and those are famously rough years for him. But I've been rereading this book here lately. It's got me on this kick. It's Willie's autobiography. It's called It's a Long Story, My Life by Willie Nelson with David Ritz. It's really good. If you're a Willie fan, I think you'll enjoy it, and I strongly recommend it. One thing that keeps jumping into my mind as I read about these early years, there's all these moments when Willie Nelson would just hit a brick wall. You know, he'd be trying to support his family with his songwriting and his music, and would just hit a brick wall and would end up in a desperate situation, you know, and a situation where a lot of people, if they didn't have the good fortune that Willie had, would just end up getting a job driving a truck and say the hell with music altogether. But there's all of these different instances. of someone stepping in and helping Willie, someone going way out of their way because they see something in him. And there's just instances over and over again, and I'd like to point out a few of those instances. It's nice to be reminded that there are good people out there who help people that we care about. One instance was before he got to Nashville. He bounced around Texas, and I won't go into all of that, but he ended up in Houston, and he thought that he could go ahead and make a living playing music. But his wife and his kids, they're about broke, and he shows up to the Esquire Ballroom in Houston. And I believe his wife and kids were waiting for him out in the car. He walks inside. This is during the day, and there's a band rehearsing, and the band is led by a man named Larry Butler, who was quite a big deal in Houston at the time, and he has a radio show and is well known. And Willie walks up to him and introduces himself. And I said, well, what do you need, Willie? And he said, well, I'm looking for a job. He says, well, what do you do? He says, I'm a singer and I'm a picker. He says, man, we don't need a singer and a picker. We're all covered. And Willie starts feeling desperate because he has to raise some money to feed his family. And he says, well, I also write songs, and I got some good ones, I think. And he says, well, why don't you play those for me and let me hear them? So Willie Nelson sits down, plays Crazy, The Nightlife, Turn Out the Lights, The Party's Over, plays these great all-time classic songs that Larry Butler's probably one of the first people to ever hear them. And Larry says, man, those are great, Willie. Those are really great. He says, well, I'll tell you what, Willie says, I will sell each of these songs to you for $10 a piece. And Larry Butler says, let me get this right. I give you $10 for one of these songs. I can put my name on it as the composer, tell everyone I wrote it, and I own all the rights, and all I have to do is give you $10. And Willie said, yes, you'd be doing me a favor. And Larry Butler says, you can't do that. And that's just, I'd be ripping you off. And he says, no, you'd be doing me a favor. Willie was that desperate. And Larry Butler at one point says, well, these songs could be worth thousands of dollars, which is funny when you think of what a huge hit Crazy ended up being. Thousands of dollars would be, a small pittance. Larry Butler said, I'll tell you what, Willie, what I will do, I will loan you $50, and you show up here and you play guitar in my band until you've worked that off. And but you have to promise me you won't, go trying to sell these songs to somebody else. You'll keep a hold of them. And Willie says, all right, I do it. So he felt great about that. And that got him a little bit of traction in Houston and just got the time over. But he decided somewhere down the road, I have to move to Nashville. That's where the songwriters are. And that's where I need to make my stand. And he had a really good way of looking at Nashville. I'm going to read a little bit for you right here to give you an idea. I like the way Willie thought about Nashville. He referred to it as the store. He says, Nashville liked to bill itself as Music City. I just saw it as the store. The store is where you shop. If you're a music producer, you shop for songs at the store. I needed to get to the store to stock my merchandise. I thought my merchandise was good, so that should have been a simple task. It wasn't. Nashville was a struggle. There were good moments, but it was an uphill battle. I did get my merchandise in the store, but that wasn't enough to get me over. With all the music coming out of Nashville, all the great musicians and legendary producers, you'd think I'd be a natural fit. I never was. For that, I don't blame Nashville. I blame my own peculiar nature. When Willie decided to move to Nashville, he dropped his wife and kids off at the in-laws in Waco and drove to Nashville in a 1950 Buick. And when he pulled up on Music Row, just got into town, the Buick broke down. He had just enough money to stay at a terrible hotel overnight, and then he was broke. The next morning, he went to get coffee at a coffee shop, and he ran into his old buddy, Billy Walker, who he'd known from Texas. And Billy Walker had a little bit of fortune. He was working for the Grand Ole Opry, and he would explain to Willie how playing on the Grand Ole Opry doesn't pay very well at all, but it gets you to know everyone in Nashville. And he's like, well, how are you doing, Willie? And he's like, well, I just got into town. I don't know anybody, and I'm broke. And Billy Walker said, I'll tell you what, you can stay with me and my wife. And he put Willie up for 3 months. Just think about it. People don't do that. They let him stay with him for 3 months, took him around town, introduced him to everyone. And, you know, most of the producers and such weren't interested in Willie's songs, but he got a little bit of a foothold in those 3 months. He got him a job selling encyclopedias door to door and was trying to pitch songs whenever he could. After the 3 months were up, Willie Nelson's wife and kids came to Nashville, and they got a place at a trailer park. It was a rundown, nasty trailer park sitting in between a junkyard and a cemetery, and it's a place where a lot of songwriters lived when they first moved to Nashville. It's made famous. It's the one that Roger Miller lived in, and when he's singing about trailers for sailor rent, rooms to let 50 cents, and King of the Road, that's the trailer park he's singing about. And Willie was living there, feeling kind of bad that his family was, you know, living in this dingy, rundown place. He wasn't making money. His wife ended up getting 2 jobs, bartending and waiting tables, and she was paying all the bills, and he was feeling guilty about that. Being a man in 1960, that was looked down upon. He's pretty honest about behaving poorly and cheating on his wife while she's supporting him and the kids while he's trying to do this songwriting thing. I appreciate the honesty, but it's not easy to read things like that. And he talks about his own hypocrisy of if she did the same thing, how he couldn't live with it, but he thought it was all right for him to be that way. But he would be hanging out at Tootsie's at night. It's where all these songwriters would hang out, and where people like Hank Corcoran, Harlan Howard, Roger Miller, you know, later on Tom T. Hall, Chris Christopherson. Tootsie's became this stronghold, is where people would show up. Tootsie was a woman who would be a mother to a lot of these songwriters, and if you didn't have money to pay for a beer, you know, or food or whatever, she would go ahead and front you, and then you would pay back later. And it was just the main hangout. So Willie talked about being there at Tootsie's and drinking, and somebody would pull out a guitar and all the songwriters would play the different songs that they had been working on. And there was a steel player named Buddy Emmons who would join in and just hang out, and he would play steel along with whatever people were playing. So it would make your song sound a lot better. A little side note about Buddy Emmons. This is Buddy Emmons' tape recorder that I bought from his estate sale. So when you see this show up in some of the videos that I've made with the interviews, that's Buddy Emmons. And the videos that I've made of me sitting on the front porch, I'm sitting on Buddy Emmons' rocking chair that I bought from his estate sale. That was Buddy's with, you know, it's one of the great steel players of all time. So a little side note there for you. But when Willie was about to bottom out pretty much in Nashville and nothing was going right, he was at Tootsie's one night and it was just snowing. And I'd like to read you a little section here about Willie bottoming out. And when a cold front hit Nashville that winter, I sat at the bar at Tootsie's and gazed out the window, watching the drifting snow, feeling as low can be. My soul was frozen over. The warm sunshine of hope was 1,000,000 miles away. I didn't know how long I could go on in Nashville. I still hadn't found a way to get my songs in the store. And even though I had found good pals like Roger and Hank, DJs Grant Turner and Ralph Emery, I felt like I was sliding down a slippery slope. You can bet I'd been downing big quantities of whiskey and wine and beer. I was no longer in my right mind. I was in my who gives a fuck mind. I was out of my mind. I got up from the bar stool and walked out into the cold. I didn't have a heavy coat, just a denim jacket, but the freezing temperature didn't bother me. The chilling wind didn't bother me. The snowfall didn't bother me. Nothing bothered me. The city was still, hardly any traffic, no one on the street except me. A weird peace came over me as I walked off the sidewalk into the middle of the street, where, don't ask me why, I decided to lie down and rest. Right then and there, I lay on my back, eyes wide open, watching the snowflakes fall on my head. I considered the possibility that a car might well roll over me. I guess I must have been okay with the possibility because for at least 10 minutes, I didn't move. Maybe I was looking for an out, or maybe I was just taking a break or a chance. It's tough to know exactly what I was up to. I was drunk, and as a rule, drunks do crazy shit. I can't tell you that I was trying to commit suicide because I wasn't. In those days, I usually packed a pistol. In my young and stupid macho mind, I thought that's what real men did. If I were really interested in ending it all, I could have shot myself in the head, but that thought did not cross my mind. Instead, it was just a matter of reclining in the middle of the street on a snowy night in Nashville. That's an interesting moment of Willie bottoming out. And it goes on to talk about how the great songwriters that he would hang out with there at Tootsie's, they would have these song pools of Mel Tillis, Roger Miller, Harlan Howard, Hank Cochran. One night at Tootsie's when Willie's playing songs, Hank Cochran heard some of his songs, and he's like, Willie, you are good. These are really great songs. And Willie says, well, I don't think Nashville thinks they're very good. He says, well, you need to stop, worrying about Nashville. You need to go to Goodlettsville, which is a really funny thing to hear nowadays because Goodlettsville is a northern suburb of Nashville, a town just north. And he's like, why Goodlettsville? And Hank Cochran says, well, there's a publishing company there, Pamper Music, owned by Hal Smith and Ray Price, and they will appreciate what you're doing. Hank Cochran was a pretty infamous song plugger besides being a songwriter. He would go to extremes to get his songs in front of people. When you hear some of the stories about him showing up at people's houses, or just meeting them at the laundromat and playing, singing songs for them, it sounds annoying as hell now, but it worked for him at the time. And so Willie goes out to Pamper Music, meets Hal Smith and sings some songs for him. And Hal Smith is like, yeah, those are pretty good. And didn't seem like it went over that well. And when he was done, Hank Cochran took him back to the trailer park and dropped him off. And he says, I'll tell you how, what the word is in the next day or two. We'll hear something, Willie. So Hank Cochran shows up the next day and tells Willie, you have a publishing deal. They want to be your publisher. You're hired on. You'll be making $50 a week writing songs. And that's all you have to do, Willie. Write songs. You get $50 a week advance off of whatever you get later on. Willie thought that was great. So all he had to do was go into an office every day and write songs. He later found out, this took quite a while to find this out, but Hank Cochran had talked to Hal Smith about getting Willie on as a staff writer, and Hal Smith was not interested. He's like, man, we have plenty of writers. We don't need this guy. And Hank Cochran said, well, you were going to give me a $50 a week raise. What you should do is give that money to Willie Nelson, and I will stay at the same salary, but just take him on, because I think he's going to make some money for this company one day. Willie didn't even know that, but thanks to Hank Cochran's generosity, that's how he got his publishing deal. And Hank Cochran was smart enough to know it wasn't all altruistic. He thought that Willie was going to write some big hits, and he figured he could co-write those hits with Willie and make a lot of money. If Willie was still in town and had a steady income writing. So Willie and Hank Cochran were writing songs together in this office, and they weren't really coming up with too much. And one day Hank Cochran had to go somewhere, and he's like, I'll tell you what, Willie, while I'm gone, you write a song, and you'll play it for me when I get back. And he's like, what'll I write about? He's like, you're a songwriter. Come up with something. So he leaves Willie. Willie is sitting in this room by himself and can't think of anything. And he's like, I got to write a song. I told him I'd write a song. So he's looking around, kind of, what do I write about? And he says, hello, Walls. How'd things go for you today? And he thought, well, that's kind of interesting, So he starts writing some more, and he ends up writing Hello, Walls. When Hank Cochran got back, Willie played it for him, and he's like, Willie, that is a hit. You did a good job. That is a hit. You're going to make some money off of that song. When Farron Young heard Hello, Walls, he knew it was a hit. He wanted to cut it. He said, Willie, we're going to make some money with this. And he'd heard that Willie was hurting for money pretty bad. So Farron Young gave him $500 advance. And he said, man, there's $500. We'll settle up down the road. When Willie got his first royalty check, it was for $3,000. This is just a few weeks later. He goes over to see Farron Young and says, I'm going to repay you that $500. And Farron Young's like, man, don't worry about it. I hear you have some cows over there where you live. You have a new calf. Why don't you just give me one of those calves down the road? And I was like, well, all right. So time goes by. And whenever they would run into each other, it became this joke about, why don't you how's that calf doing? And Willie said, oh, it's getting good and fat. But recording this Hello, Walls and having a big hit just opened up a lot of doors, as you would imagine. And Willie started getting a lot of other cuts. And it was the first time he'd never really had to worry about money that much. Somewhere down the road, Willie said that he was playing a rodeo in Austin, Texas, and they were auctioning off this prized bull, this huge prize bull. Willie bought it for $15,000, and he had it sent to Farron Young in Nashville. As Farron Young walks out into his driveway, and there's this huge prize bull sitting there, and there's a letter saying, Farron, your calf grew up. And so Farron Young ended up putting that bull out to stud, and it, had a nice retirement for breeding purposes throughout the rest of his life. I've gone on for quite a while here. There's a lot to tell about Willie, and I'll probably tell some more. But if you take away one thing from this video, just think of all the acts of kindness that brought us Willie Nelson. All of these moments when Willie, could have just went off and drove a truck and you'd never hear from him again. Being good enough, is just a small part of it. It takes a lot of luck, and Willie had a lot of luck and a lot of people who went the extra mile because they believed in him. And I like hearing stories like that. If you have a favorite Willie story from those, early years, or a favorite Willie song, let me know in the comments. I'd like to hear about it. I think Nightlife is about as good as it gets when you hear Ray Price doing it. It's just timeless and perfect in every way, I think. But subscribe, hit the like button, and I will see you guys down the road. Much love to you.